Okay. Good. Dear students, Viva Mexico, and welcome to this morning's class on history of political thought. We are advancing into the next part on medieval political thought, even behind the Greek and Roman times, especially the Greek. This is not exactly the most exciting part of this course because we're talking about a very different world than the one we live in. But there are some topics that are still relevant today. And those are the ones that I want to focus on and talk about today. So today I want to talk about the classic question, the question of the relationship between church and state, which is always actual, right? You almost permanently have religious debates going on, or debates that have religious implications, such as abortion, for example. And then the president says something Christian, and then everybody goes crazy because that's so weird in a Catholic country. But instead of addressing those things directly, today I want to take you to the very root of the problem, the very origins. Where did this even come from, right? That's what we are going to do today. Students, I hope you have still some energy in you to listen to that. So we're going to talk about two things. To even talk about the relationship between the state and the church, we need to first figure out where does the church even come from? Because the church is, politically speaking, quite a unique thing. You've had organized religions before the church. You also had even situations in which the church was, or in which religious groups were very powerful, right? Where priests were the rulers of society, where the rulers were seen as representatives of gods. But in that case, the religious power and the state power were the same thing. Priest was the king. Well, church is separated from power. It's a second power, right? It's not like church is the king. They just are a power next to it. So it's quite unique in human history to have religion be a secondary power next to, not the same as, the ruling power. And so we have to explain it, why you enjoy this image of Christ dunking on the devil, right? Devil breaking his ankle and everything. Because Christ is too good with that ball. So let's talk about the start of the church. Where does it come from? Well, we have to explain how it fitted within the times that were there, right? So we saw last time, when we talked about Stoicism, that they make a distinction in these times between two types of law, two types of morals, two types of rules. You have the rules as they are in a particular place, the ones that you cannot necessarily change, right? Like the Roman law or the rule of whatever crazy king you had. And then you had this idea that there was some kind of universal law. We saw it last time at the end of my lecture, that there was some kind of truths that were true everywhere, right? And that could either be based on reason, such as math, for example, right? Math is universal law based on reason. But it could also be nature, the idea that the world works a certain way, right? Which is a dangerous idea, but you could have that. Or more commonly, God. That God wanted certain things for the world, for all humans, and that once we understand them, we should follow them, regardless of what the king says, right? The problem with natural law is that since you're interpreting the universe, there is no real authority to this, right? There's nobody doing that. It's the universe, whatever that means, which has the law. Like if you believe in karma or whatever. But this all becomes a lot more concrete once we have something like the church, right? Once we have something like Christianity, which will start defining what these kind of big moral laws are, then it suddenly becomes a positive in the sense of existing thing. Okay, this sounds a bit abstract, but it will soon all become clear. Now, before I get into it, right? And by the way, we're missing at least 15 people. That's a big shame. I hope they're not burning in hell for not showing up. But before I start, we have to keep in mind this lecture is not about Christ, right? This is not about the content of Christianity. It's about the form. So Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, was and carpenter, who some people say is the Son of God. Well, a lot of people say that. And then you have the church, which is a semi-political organization, right, which goes much beyond Christ himself. So today I'm talking about the church. Your essay is about Christ. We're not talking about Christ here. We're talking about the organization, the priests and the popes and the bishops, right? That's what we are talking about today. So they're quite separate, or they became, maybe unfortunately, separate things. Now, for Christianity to even be allowed, it needs to somehow fit in with philosophy, right? The Romans must have took some interest in this idea, which came from one of their colonies, right? Came from this idea for it to even work. So there are many factors. Some have to do with the Christians themselves, plotting and just gaining power within Rome. The others have to do with certain prominent Roman thinkers, let's say, opening doors for Christianity. Now, one of them is Seneca. Seneca was not a Christian, but he lived in the early days of Christianity, like right after Christ. He was born 4 before Christ and then lived another 69 years. Now, Seneca was quite interesting. Seneca was the right-hand man of Emperor Nero. And Emperor Nero was, I don't know if you know anything about him. Emperor Nero was, to say it lightly, not a nice guy. Emperor Nero was very nihilistic. He was not a Stoic. He was very hedonistic, nihilistic, and sadistic man who enjoyed, well, besides sex, he enjoyed torturing people, murdering people, blood, madness. So, among other things, Nero was known for burning his own city multiple times just to see what happens, right? So he put Rome on fire just to see people scream. And Seneca was like the guy next to him. Seneca was the guy who, it was like Trump's assistant, like the guy who makes sure the world doesn't collapse. Like he was this guy who tried to keep the empire together while the emperor was clowning the people. So Seneca was not, he was under no illusion that he was on the good team. He knew that his boss was crazy. He knew that everything was corrupt. Not just him, right? All lower politicians too, all senators, all of them are corrupt, and basically there was nothing to defend here, right? He was like the one sane guy in the pre, let's say. And Nero is like the Javier Duarte of their time. So Seneca, he didn't exactly feel like inspiring people about politics, right? He thought that politics was simply hopeless as a path to justice. He said, if you want justice, don't come to us. We don't have it. We have madness here in this house. So, although he was a politician, he was let's say the prime minister under Nero. Nero killed him in the end, by the way. It's not that he escaped the madness, but while he was still alive, right, he was not very inspired by politics. So he said, look, if you want to do good in the world, right, try to do good to the people. Don't come to the state. You should focus your moral energy to directly, let's say, towards other people, to be humane to them, to show mercy, charity, love, to be friendly to people, right? Not by joining politics. That's not going to solve it. Not that he's not against the empire. He was the empire, right? He just says that this is not, maybe not in my times, not the way to do things. So even if we live in bad times, we should focus just on being good, right? On being nice people. So in a way, Seneca is my opposite, right? Seneca is saying, don't join politics, just be a good brother. I would say, fuck being a good brother, join politics. Yeah, we're kind of opposites here. Because you can question, can you really do this, right? Can you, is it a good idea to say that ethics is somehow outside of politics? Don't you kind of give up on politics already then? Or maybe you could say that because it goes both ways, it also means that ethics then are not political. I would say that would be very important, right? But it just boils down to being a nice person. I think we don't solve any problems in this world by being a nice person. But anyway, we can differ of opinion. So here he's going to try to open some space for what we know as the church, right? We have to understand his philosophy here. So Seneca, like many people, many good people, had the belief that there used to be a better times, that there used to be some kind of golden age from which humanity has fallen. A very Christian idea, right? The Garden of Eden that we got kicked out of. In this case, he believed it was some kind of communism where everybody was equal. Usually when people imagine like a utopic past, they think of it as communist, which is funny because they're scared of communism in real life, but when they think of good things, they happen to think of that. But we cannot get back there, he says. This is not possible. We have fallen. We're fallen angels. We're corrupted. Yet the state has some role, and the state means Rome, has some role to play here. We have to accept it, first of all, because we just need government anyway, whatever happens, right? But also we need the state to correct us. So the state is not going to make us better, but it might stop us from falling even further, right? Since the corruption is already in us, the state might not be able to stop you from stealing, but they can punish you for it, which is, something. It will stop things from getting worse. So there should be a state. There should be the empire. The empire is there to kind of protect humanity from getting worse. It's a bit like Warhammer 40k, if any one of you plays that. Like the empire is there to protect things from getting totally out of hand, but it's not good in itself. Rome, which was because he was in charge of Rome, but it's not very inspiring. Let's say there's no prestige to it. What he really says, what we again should be focusing on, is the spiritual side of things, because we live in bad times, and since we can't really change that, let's focus on trying to find hope in some different realm. Let's try to focus on, since we're all fighting each other and backstabbing each other, right? Let's try to connect on a different level. Let's try to see ourselves all as brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of God, right? Let's try to connect on a moral and a religious level. Let's try to also create a non-political community and serve that and understand our duty towards the non-political spiritual community that's beneath this fallen empire, let's say. So in a way, he's creating the space for the church to happen, right? He's creating a space for an independent institution that is just about spiritual things, that also has authority because it's important, but it is not the empire. It's something parallel to it, and that of course will become the church. Do you understand this? It's a bit abstract, right? Miss Alejandra, are you following?
As of right now, yes.
Okay, muy bien. So then we go forward with the two swords theory, while you enjoy this picture of the real Rose of Guadalupe. The two swords theory. Spoiler, once sword is the state, the other is the church. But why are they called swords? Well, because they're both above your head. See, the church, once it's established itself after the 1st century, right, became this new type institution that we never had before in human history. Because on the one hand, it was universalist. The Christian God is not a God of a particular people, right? Keep in mind, the Jewish God is the God of the Jews, not of other people. You can't just become Jewish, right? He's a God only for Jews. The same with the Roman gods. Roman gods were and the Greek gods. They were the gods of the Greeks, not the gods of Belgians. The Christian God claims to be, because there's only one of them, claims to be the God of everyone, right? Just like the Islamic God, which is a Christian God, Allah tries to be for all people. And they were also in the place where the biggest empire at that point was, in Rome, right? Both the emperor and the pope lived in Rome. So they were in the center of power. But they did respect the emperor, partly because they needed to, or they would get killed immediately, right? They were outsiders. They came from the outside. So they needed to, they basically needed to make a deal with the emperor. And this was a literal deal, like on paper. We agree that we're going to say this about God, and you're not going to kill us. And the deal was that they would recognize the authority of the emperor in a religious way. So they said that ultimately all authority comes from God, which makes sense, right? In a religious way. And it is towards God that we must act right, which is a very important point here. So your moral duties, your ethical duties in life are not towards me or the other person. They're towards God. You must act good because God tells you to act good, and you must respect God, not the person you're acting good towards, right? Which is a kind of a twisted thing in Orthodox Christian thinking. But if that's true, then you should also respect God's decision to make the emperor the emperor. So here they came with the doctrine that the emperor or the king or whoever it is appointed by God. He was chosen. If God is all powerful and God didn't want that person to be the leader, then they wouldn't make them the son of the old leader, right? But he did. So you can see that the emperor is appointed by God. And this was literally a bargain, right? The emperor kind of forced them to say this. And from then onwards in history, that's what they've been saying. So you have to respect the rule of the emperor, right? Because God made him the emperor. So you have to respect him. So from here onwards, you now get a situation in which people are faced with a dual loyalty. They have to be loyal towards the church, because they're the church, and they represent God, and they have to be loyal towards the state, because God gave authority to the state, and because the state is going to chop your head off if you're not loyal. So you have two good reasons to be loyal, right? But in the past, these used to be the same thing, or they used to be totally separate, but you didn't have these two things you had to be loyal to, and that's very typical for medieval times. It's very typical for medieval times. I'm going to explain that in more detail next week. That you, as an ordinary peasant, there's so many people you need to listen to. Like, it's not like you have one leader. You have 13 different people who have some type of authority over you, and the two most important ones of those are the empire and the church. Now, if you think of this relation, right, so you have these two pillars of power, the state and its army, and the church and its preaching, they actually can work quite well together. So let's first talk about the synergy before we talk about the problems that come from this. You can see why this situation is beneficial for both. On the side of the empire, they kind of were in need of something like a Christian religion. They needed a religion with one God that could unify people from Egypt all the way to France, right? That could bring all these very different people together under a common belief and make them feel connected in some way. And if that religion would then allow them, or give them more arguments to accept the authority of Rome, even better, right? And it does. It's in the Bible. Jesus literally says you have to give to Caesar what's to Caesar and to God what's to God. In other words, respect the Romans. Jesus said this at gunpoint, right? He was trapped by Roman soldiers. So you could question how sincere this was, but he did say it. So for the empire, this was good. You had the religion, it kept people peaceful, right? Because they were all occupied by being good people, which makes them less resistant. It unifies them, and it makes them accept the authority. For the church, it was very good to be on the side of the empire, because the empire gave them some muscle, right? The church is inherently a weak organization. They're made of men in dresses, right? Who pray all day. It's not exactly, the army you want on your side. So it was good that they had a real army to defend themselves with, and to give them also the power to impose their religion, right? If you want to have more souls, it's good if there's an army that's going to conquer people that then will impose Christianity on those people. That gives you more souls for the church, more souls for redemption, to glorify God. So it was a win-win situation for them. They kind of worked in a tag team, where in a kind of good cop, bad cop relationship, where the church was a good cop. They would talk about loyalty and redemption, and if you're good, you're going to go to heaven, and you should be a good person and don't kill people. And then you had the state, which in case you violate any of these rules, would send a knight to your home, who would smack you over the head with a mace. So they played this game together, which worked well in maintaining power. Of course, these two things, since you're now mixing two types of authority, they almost inevitably corrupt each other, right? The church becomes corrupted because the church is getting involved with real power. They have an army. They should never have had an army. They will get money, right, from this. They will inherit lands, because maybe some king dies and then he gives part of his lands to the church, etc. So the church is now getting involved with money, with property, with wars. So they might have to take sides in certain conflicts. So you can understand how that slowly will start corrupting the church, which is very sad, right? And on the other hand, it also corrupts the state, because if you don't have something like a church, you as a state, you need to create your own moral authority, right? You need to be, if you want to be respected, you need to be a good king. While if God is already on your side, and you have kind of outsourced the moral authority to another organization, and the priest is going to preach for you, then you don't need to act moral anymore. You don't need to be a good example. Yeah, you've outsourced that. So you can just go and pillage and burn and kill people, because you no longer have to be the example here. So you can see how this doesn't necessarily happen, but how it could corrupt both. Man, I'm running out of time. I have to hurry up. Of course, these two powers are going to be jealous of each other, right? It's not hard to imagine we're going to see a conflict between them. And not just the conflict between them in real life, but especially conflict between them in the minds of people. Because if you're a citizen in this time, you're in a very confusing situation where there's two types of authority that claim control over you. You have the church, who says that they have the key to eternal life, to your soul. So you might want to listen to that. But then you also have the empire, who physically make the rules and who can kill you. Yeah. So in principle, they go together. We just saw that, right? In theory. In practice, though, they're going to conflict at some point, right? What if the church wants to have taxes too, but you already paid them to the king? Now you have to choose. You have to make a very stressful choice. The king is going to kill you, and the church is going to send you to hell. that it's a stressful choice to make for people, right? So, and the problem is that the church, okay, introduction to this, spoiler, the state is going to win this conflict. Long term, over 1,500 years, the state is going to win this, the war between state and church. But at the time, the church, at least from the perspective of the citizen, has the upper hand. Because they say that God gives authority to the emperor, but first of all, this was a political deal. They don't necessarily really believe this. And they are closer to God in a way, right? So they will always feel inside that they're superior to the state. And they logically have the stronger argument. Because the state might kill you, but eternal hell is worse than dying, right? The punishment of the church is forever. The state probably won't kill you in the first place. They might imprison you or something like that. And that's going to end at some point, maybe in death, but it will end. So if you're serious about religion, right, then the church is a bit scarier to you. And the church knows this. So the church also believes this themselves, right? They believe we are more important. We are getting people to heaven. This ultimately is the final goal of things. So the church deep down will never really respect the state. The other way around they might, but the church can never really respect the state. And this is very common in all kinds of religious fundamentalists, that they don't respect human institutions. This is very similar if you would hear people from Islamic State or Al-Qaeda talk about the West. They'll say, oh yeah, but you with your democracy and your laws made by humans, this doesn't compare to the laws of God, etc., etc. And this, of course, gets worse once the church starts to get out of its own steps, right? Once the church starts making taxes, for example, or getting into military rules, or getting into family rules, or things like that, then it's really overstepping its boundaries there. Now, to give you an example of what we go to if we take this serious, right? And how the church logically will feel superior. But I respect this argument. It is a logical argument. I respect conservatives. I respect consistency in religion people. We have very little of that, but I respect it. And one of those very consistent people is St. Augustine. St. Augustine is an early, I think 5th century, early saint of the Catholic Church. And he was very consistent in his thinking. He has an interesting philosophy. He says, look, man is going to live in two types of cities. And by city is a metaphor. He means community, okay? He says we belong to the city where we were born, the city that we're in, Monterrey. But at the same time, we also belong to a community of God. And we're going to die at some point and live in that community of God. So we're always living in two communities at the same time. We're living in our actual reality community, but we're already, the things we do already are affecting life after death. So we also kind of live at the same time in the city of God. And the city of God is clearly superior, right? Because that leads to salvation. And so if you want to do good in the world, if you want to be just, you have to think of eternal life, right? If you think of God, don't think about whatever justice might look like between you and your neighbors, because this is just temporal, right? You need to follow rules of God. That is justice, right? Not what seems just, but what is written that is just, because that's going to bring on salvation. And salvation is a serious thing, by the way, right? This is a judgment day theology. This is the idea that one day Christ is going to come back, look at how we're doing, and if we're not doing well, then poof, the world ends. And if we're doing good, we all will go to heaven. This is not based on anything Christ said. This is based on later parts of the Bible, right? Acts and Romans, which talk about this. So the only way out of this philosophy is to say that yeah, but Christ didn't say it. Like this is, you know, story afterwards. But it is still in the Bible, this idea that the judgment day would come. And this is collective, right? God is going to judge the state of humanity, not you, but how we are doing. So this is very stressful for the church. The church is looking at his watch and say, oh man, we had like 300 years to get people to act right, right? To create this moral community before judgment days comes. So we better get this done, right? We better get on with it. So if you believe this, then yes, the church should have power. The church must be political, because the church is the only organization that is going to hurt the people towards salvation, right? The state's not going to do it. So we, the church, need more power. That was Augustine's argument, and it's a very consistent argument. It is true in a way. However, I do want to warn you, so you really understand what the implication of this is, right? The implication of this is a type of madness. The implication is, what it really means, is that we're going to organize politics. And politics is, again, how we decide how we're living together and how we solve problems. Not based on how we're living together, not based on our problems, but on an other world. Yeah, we're going to decide politics on earth based on politics in heaven, which, for all I know, isn't there, right? So there's a certain, although it makes sense, there's a certain madness to this, that we're going to organize our try and solve our problems, not to what would make sense or what we want, right? You're not asking what do people want or what's the best thing to do. You're asking what would God want, or how do we get into heaven? Which has nothing to do with the problems you're trying to solve, right? Now, good thing, because since Christianity is a wise religion, that often they are the same thing, yeah, but theoretically they're not. So you're kind of eliminating 80% of politics, right? Whole questions of democracy, etc. This is all irrelevant to the unearthly interests here. Keep in mind, though, this is something different from the religious values of the church, right? The church is pro-democracy on paper today, strongly, actually. But this is about reaching salvation, right? This is about judgment day theory is not really that present anymore, because the due date passed. It was going to be 1,000 after Christ, and 1,000 happened, and judgment day didn't happen. But this quest for salvation is not the same as doing politics with religious values, yeah, of charity and compassion, etc. They're separate things. This is really about saying that religion is more important than politics. Okay. Two others. Do I have time even for this? I'm going to come back to it if I have time. I'm going to skip this slide. Now, let's talk a bit about it. Yes, I hope you were following. I hope you are awake. Let's talk a bit about it. This is quite deep, what we've seen. You could say, this problem doesn't exist anymore because, you know, teacher, here in Mexico, we have separation of state and church. To which I would say, yes, that works because nobody cares. But you haven't really solved, philosophically, the problem is not solved. You just solved in practice because nobody's trying to change anything. But it is not that simple. You could say, yes, we should keep the church out of politics. Yes, we can't have the church undermine the state. And I think most of you believe that, including me. And there are good arguments for this. Yeah, you can say, first of all, one of the problems would be if we mix state and church, that since the state is a geographical unit, that now assumes that all people in that state have the same religion. Which they don't, right? There's different religions, including the president, who is not Catholic, but Protestant. So this assumes that we all have the same culture, which we don't, and even if we didn't, it would break kind of freedom of religion principles. Okay, that's an argument. You can also go back to what I just said, that you're basing now political authority on an unpolitical organ, right? You're basing the solution of real life problems on the solution of afterlife problems.
which only is the right thing to do if you believe in heaven and hell. If you don't believe that, then, or if you're really cruel and you just believe that's just your own problem, right? If you're gonna go to hell, then this argument becomes more problematic. But let's say we do believe it, right? Let's say that, no, but we are good Christians, we should follow God. The next problem is that, what does it mean to follow God in a political sense? Because God, and I mean this as a factual, God is not here, right? And I hope we can agree on this. I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. I'm saying that God is absent. God is not here in the way that Felipe Calderon is here. Yes. I have never seen God. Maybe you have. I've never seen God. I've never seen angels. I've also never seen God intervene. I didn't see him stop Trump. I never saw God tackle a narco so President Seville could arrest him. God also didn't stop COVID. So God isn't present in the way that the president is present. Doesn't say he doesn't exist, right? But God is not, I can't ask God stuff, right? There's no mañanera with God. So if God is absent, who exactly speaks for him? Is it you, the church? Like, I believe in God, but like, who's taking decisions on God's part? And why is it you, Mr. Bishop, that is doing that? I say I'm the president. I know why I'm the president, because most people voted for you, but who are you? Yeah, there come certain political problems with that. So these are all good reasons to want to strip the church of political power. But it's not that simple. If I play, not the devil's advocate, because that would be a paradox, Christ's advocate here, it's not that simple, because if you are religious, there is no good reason not to be consistent in your religion. And this is something I truly believe. If I was Christian, I would be very strongly Christian. Yeah. Either I believe God exists and he said to give all these rules, and thus I'm going to follow these rules, or God exists as all powerful, but then somehow doesn't care about these rules he just set me. It's kind of a weird position to be in. So if you're religious, then why not follow these rules, right? Why, if I truly believe that Judgment Day is coming and I need to save all of us, why would I pretend this is not true just to be nice? Yeah, just to fit in. No, we need to save humanity. Yeah, we need to get on with things. So why would I care about other things? Also, if I was religious, I would say, oh, so you want moral power and political power to be separate, right? So how was 70 years of the Pre for you? Did you like that, to have amoral politicians? Did you enjoy the corruption, the stealing, the murdering? Did you enjoy all these crooks and bastards who ruled without morals? Because don't come crying now, right? You wanted to separate moral authority from political authority. You wanted to not have any moral rules here. You want to say, oh, that's for the private sphere. Okay, good. Well, then you get presidents who have no morals. Yeah. Don't come crying now. And the other problem is that we sometimes mistake secularism for something like state atheism. It's not because the state is secular that it cannot talk about God, or that you cannot have political values, that you cannot have religious values in politics. Yeah. If you couldn't, that would be a violation of secularism, because that means the state would take the side of atheism, right? If you say, oh, you can have communist values and capitalist values, but not Christian values, that would be the state breaking its own secularism, because it would now take sides against Christianity. So since it cannot do that, me, a religious person, I must have a way of expressing my religion, right? If my side wins the elections, why not base my rule on my religious values? That's only fair, right? You cannot say that your communist values somehow are superior to my values if that's what the people want. So you can still, at the end of the day, you can still end up with religiously inspired rules, and you should, in a way. So as you see now, we can separate state of the church, and that works in practice. There's no violence coming from this. But philosophically, we have not ended the debate. It's not like you separate them and then the problem goes away. It just goes away in practice. But both sides can keep pushing, right? It becomes this eternal struggle. It's just that the church is not really pushing at this point. But in Islamic countries, for example, it does push, right? And then you can ask the question, can you really just have private religion? Can you really just say, oh, it's just for you and you need to follow your God? Because God asks for some things that are not just personal. As you would have seen in your homework, Christ is quite militant about changing society and about us, not you, us doing things better. So this idea of religion as just a private thing that has no public consequences, I think is a bit naive. Either you do take its political side into account, or you just get a kind of empty religion that's just, like I wrote in my essay, for those of you who read it, that just stripped of most of its content just to fit in our individualism. So the problem, dear students, keeps existing. I'm going to end it here. I'll start with this slide next time because I want to make time for your questions. What questions do you have? Did you understand this? You all fell asleep.
Teacher.
This is somebody who says, teacher, this makes no sense. What the hell are you talking about? I thought you would have loads of questions. All right. Let's go back to this image. No comments?
I don't think that it is like that it doesn't make sense, because I think it really does. In a kind of way, I think that maybe I'm not a really believer in church, but yes, in doing good. So I think that in a way, this old thing about church was made for people to be good and to keep them like to keep them calm and not be bad, but really in a taking hand with politics, like not politics but government, so I'm really okay with the thinking and the things that you said today.
All right.
So I think that there is no questions about it.
All right then, students. Are there questions about anything else? About politics in general, something that you don't understand or something that happened?
I have a question.
I do have a question.
All right, sir, I didn't catch your name. Astrid, we'll get to you soon. Somebody else ask something first.
Yeah, me.
Good.
My question is, how do you see the AMLO discourse, or how do you say it? Speech around this humanist constant like pedagogic speech around morals? Is it like a relation to the like state, or how do you feel about it?
Well, so two things. What I was trying to explain is that we misunderstand secularism, which I think what you mean with like state, as the state not, or the government not making any value-based statements, which is not what it is, because politics is about values. including religious values. It just means that the state is not going to, in its laws, discriminate based on religion, right? It's not going to force you to be of a certain religion, and it's not going to, not give you a pension if you're a Muslim. So I think he can do this. I think what he's trying to do, though, is very hard, right? Trying to regain moral authority in politics, which is hard in Mexico because it's so eroded. So I think when he does it, it sometimes sounds a bit silly because it sounds so out of place, because you're used to presidents being, maybe the right person, but not a good person. So it sometimes looks a bit clownish when he's preaching this. Well, I think AMLO is a very religious person. I think it kind of bleeds through what he's saying. I don't know if that's an answer to your question. I don't mind it. I don't mind it. I like to know what politicians' values are. Any other question? Astrid, you had some question in general about life.
Yes, within the church obedience, it was mentioned that the ruler was appointed by God, but
Yes.
then when was the church disconnected to the state? When was the time?
It was never connected to the state. So the church came from the outside, right? You had the followers of Christ. They fled Israel to Rome, where the empire was already there. But they became more popular over time. And at some point, the empire said, okay, look, we have to talk. Yeah, come to the palace. We have to talk about how we're going to do this. And then they said, yeah, but what if we say that God appointed you? The emperor was like, all right. And that's kind of how it happened. There's also things in the Bible that back this up. This doesn't come out of nowhere, right? But the idea is that God gives power to some people. Some people, God chose, the apostles. God chose certain people. God chose Peter to lead the church. So it's logical that if you are born in a position of power, and if you're born or not is God's decision. So if you have a king, if the king is going to have a child, God theoretically decides who that child is. Therefore, God chose the heir to the throne. God chose the next king. So that would be the theory behind it. But that's not the church. That's God doing that. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, and actually you answered another question that I had, that it was towards like, how did they know that the ruler was appointed by God? I imagine that it was something like, yeah, I'm gonna make something up and I'm gonna say that I was appointed by God, but they're not really sure, and that's what you just said.
It is more complex than this. Next week, I'm going to talk a bit about kings and feudalism and like the political system in which all this story takes place. There are multiple ways in which you can become a king. This is one of them. And all of them have some kind of relation to God. But I'll talk about that next week. But the most simple way of becoming king is by being the child of a king. Maria, you have a question.
It's not really a question. It's just a comment. It reminds me a lot of the idea of, God chooses the winner, the victor. So yes. If you go to war with the current king and you win, then it's God choosing you as well, instead of being born out of. It's like God wanted a change or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So in that sense, and that's one of the dangers of mixing religion with politics, is that like whatever happens, it happened for a reason, right? So that by that logic, everything is justified. Like whatever happens is what should have happened. So it becomes hard to critique things. And we're going to see next class, some of the consequences of that argument that are very bad for democracy. But I'm going over my time, dear students, and I don't want to stop you from your other classes. So I will say goodbye, and next time we continue on the subject, more religious stuff. I'll see you next class. Take care and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
Thank you.